Kimmel was taken off the air because he had low ratings.
Vice President Maybelline was making the rounds, attempting to defend his boss and the chairman of the FCC with a new fairy tale even a 5-year-old wouldn't believe.
Celebrities are rallying to his cause, saying this is a First Amendment assault being carried out by the FCC, Brendan Carr, and by the President of the United States himself. And to that, you say?
Well, there are two things. First of all, I'd like them to tell me exactly what Brendan Carr did to have Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air, because number one, he is currently on the air, and to the extent that he isn't in certain stations, it's because he's not funny and because his ratings aren't very good.
I have some good news for you, J-Dog. We're back on all the stages.
The cameras were rolling, the audience was sitting there waiting, and Jimmy Kimmel looked straight into the camera before letting an awkward silence hang in the air for a few seconds. You could tell he knew exactly where he was going with it. His target was J.D. Vance, and a claim Vance had recently made on Fox, where he insisted that Kimmel had basically been pushed off television because nobody was watching anymore. But instead of firing back right away, Kimmel took his time and stretched out the moment, building anticipation and setting up the joke perfectly. Then, with flawless timing, he delivered the punchline, revealing that his so-called disappearance had actually ended with his show returning everywhere, from family living rooms and neighborhood bars to places that were definitely not family-friendly. The audience immediately broke into laughter, and Kimmel kept the momentum going by giving Vance a brand new nickname, Vice President Maybelline, turning the whole political jab into a joke that landed instantly.
Kimmel was taken off the air because he had low ratings, because the late-night talk show host model is not doing particularly well, and let's be honest, because he had become so politically unhinged that I think he wasn't particularly funny. Now, the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, put out a couple of tweets, but the government took no action. We did literally nothing to try to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air. We believe in free speech. We also believe in the right of a television station or a network to cancel somebody because of low ratings. And I think it's a little bit rich. The second point I make, Rashad, is it's a little bit rich for people to say that somehow we're engaged in censorship when literally every day, including yesterday, we found out that Google and YouTube were censoring information at the height of COVID at the direction of the Biden administration. So if we're looking for real sources of the government driving censorship, we should be looking at the policies of the Biden administration. We absolutely reject censorship in the Trump administration. We don't want to prevent anybody from speaking their mind, but if a TV station wants to cancel a guy because he's not funny, that's their business.
This was about a lot more than just a clever one-liner. Underneath all the laughter, Kimmel was making a direct response based on real events, not rumors or speculation. He wasn't throwing out opinions or guessing about what had happened. He was pointing to actual, documented facts. By the time he addressed the controversy, his show had already been restored across Nexstar and Sinclair, the two major station groups that had temporarily stopped carrying it. And that's an important detail because it completely changed the narrative being pushed by his critics. To really understand why his response hit so hard, you have to look at everything that happened before that moment. The controversy started when Kimmel was taken off the air for 6 days after one of his monologues sparked a wave of online backlash. Disney eventually brought him back, but even after the official suspension ended, several affiliate stations still kept the show off their schedules. That extended delay quickly became a major part of the controversy and gave critics even more ammunition, turning the situation into a much bigger story than a simple temporary absence from television.
Go on.
There's something else that's important here, Laura, which is that these broadcast companies, ABC, NBC, CBS, they enjoy the public airwaves because they serve the public interest. So I actually think that we should be having a conversation about whether these companies are serving the public interest. That's actually totally separate from the Jimmy Kimmel issue because nothing happened to him. He's currently on the air, and to the extent that he's not, it's because advertisers don't like him because his ratings aren't very good.
My ratings aren't very good. Last time I checked, your ratings were somewhere between a hair in your salad and chlamydia. In 3.5 years, I'm not the one who's going to be doing mascara tutorials on YouTube. How did we wind up with a president and a vice president who wear more makeup than Kylie Jenner and Lady Gaga combined? The President of the United States made it very clear he wants to see me and the hundreds of people who work here fired from our jobs. Our leader celebrates Americans losing their livelihoods because he can't take a joke. He was somehow able to squeeze Colbert out of CBS. Then he turned his sights on me, and now he's openly rooting for NBC to fire Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers and the hundreds of Americans who work for their shows who don't make me.
Said I'm a never Trump guy, never liked him. Terrible candidate, idiot if you voted for him, might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroine, noxious and reprehensible.
Look, I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett.
From the sidelines, Donald Trump celebrated the situation while J.D. Vance tried to frame the controversy as proof that Kimmel's audience had given up on him. For a while, that narrative seemed to be picking up steam, and some people started treating it like the obvious explanation. But then reality started moving in a very different direction. Sinclair reversed its decision and brought the program back, and not long after that, Nexstar did the same. Suddenly, all those claims about terrible ratings and disappearing viewers didn't sound nearly as convincing when people across the country could once again watch the show and live audiences were showing up in full force to hear Kimmel's latest material. Seeing the opportunity, Kimmel did what he does best and turned the entire situation into comedy. What began as a debate over a suspension quickly grew into something much bigger, becoming a public conversation about how the whole controversy had been presented and how the narrative surrounding it started to fall apart once the facts caught up with the headlines.
It's been overwhelming. I've heard from a lot of people over the last 6 days. I've heard from all the people in the world over the last 6 days. Everyone I have ever met has reached out 10 or 11 times. Weird characters from my past are the guy who fired me from my first radio job in Seattle, where we are not airing tonight, by the way. Sorry, Seattle. His name is Larry. In 1989, Larry tried to force me to do a bit called Jokes for Donuts, where people would call in with a joke and I would give them donuts. I refused to do it, and I made a lot of fun of Larry for suggesting it, and eventually Larry fired me, and I had to move back in with my parents. But even he wrote in to cheer me up. Thank you, Larry, and I want to thank everyone who checked.
What happened next only made Kimmel's position even stronger. His return brought in some of the biggest audience numbers the show had seen in years, and even after the initial excitement started to cool down, viewership settled at levels that were still noticeably higher than before the suspension. That's not what you would expect from a show that's supposedly fading away or losing its relevance. While J.D. Vance continued repeating his version of events, Kimmel had something much harder to argue with on his side: actual results. He wasn't relying on talking points or speculation. He had ratings, station coverage, and audience engagement that people could see for themselves. As political figures continued trying to downplay concerns surrounding the controversy, Kimmel kept the focus where he wanted it, on the facts, the response from viewers, and the growing gap between the narrative being pushed and what was actually happening in the real world.
Some that I do especially want to mention are my fellow late-night talk show hosts, my friend Stephen Colbert, who found himself in this predicament, my friends Jon Stewart, Seth Meyers, Jimmy Fallon, John Oliver, Conan O'Brien, James Corden, Arsenio, Kathy, Wanda, Chelsea, even Jay reached out. Sometimes I wonder in what world is the vice president of the United States calling into a giant-toothed podcast host to badmouth me and the people who watch this show.
There are these judges. Judge Boasberg comes to mind. Lots of judges who are trying to basically say the president can't exercise the powers of the president.
The situation became even more complicated as growing pressure around the controversy started attracting attention from lawmakers and people within the media industry. FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr later clarified that he had never threatened anyone's broadcast licenses and had only raised concerns about what he viewed as possible distortion. Even with that clarification, many observers were focused less on individual comments and more on the overall sequence of events. From their perspective, the show disappeared, the pressure surrounding the controversy continued to grow, and then the debate became even more intense. Eventually, Disney brought Kimmel back, and affiliate stations slowly began restoring the program as well. By the time Kimmel returned to the spotlight, he had already woven that entire chain of events into his monologue, turning it into part of the story itself. That's why the discussion was never just about ratings. The bigger issue was everything that happened around the controversy, how it unfolded in public, and the questions it raised as the situation continued to evolve.
Billy is running the country like it's one of his businesses. He said he would. Just to give you some perspective, the government being shut down is even worse than when it's up and running. Republicans would like you to believe that Democrats should shut the government down. But the bill they wanted the Democrats to sign would knock out about 15 million Americans from health insurance. If this bill passes, your health insurance premiums could go up 75%. So there was no way the Democrats could vote for it. It's like like going to dinner and the waiter says you must order lasagna. The chef made it today. And a bunch of you are going to get food poisoning from it. But if you don't eat it, you've ruined the meal. That's the Garfield version of what's going on right now.
When Kimmel stepped onto the stage in Brooklyn, he didn't stop after landing one memorable joke. Instead, he kept building on the moment, stacking one layer of humor on top of another throughout the entire segment. The Vice President Maybelline line was really just the beginning. From there, he joked about what he portrayed as the administration's obsession with appearances, poked fun at the idea that he had somehow managed to avoid mascara tutorials all these years, and then shifted toward a much sharper target. He turned his attention to the decision to release files related to Amelia Earhart, using it as the setup for a broader point. The joke suggested that there were more urgent controversies that deserved public attention, and the message behind it was hard to miss. Through the comedy, Kimmel highlighted what critics describe as a pattern of redirecting public focus away from uncomfortable or politically sensitive issues and toward topics that feel safer, less controversial, and easier to talk about. The laughs were there, but underneath them was a clear argument about where attention was being directed and what conversations were being pushed into the background.
Aligning to the shutdown, according to their official website, during the shutdown, our friends at the FCC will cease their response to consumer complaint and inquiry phone lines, which I'm not a lawyer, but I think means we can now say whatever we want on TV. To being a direct violation of the First Amendment is not a particularly intelligent threat to make in public. Ted Cruz said he sounded like a mafioso. Although, I don't know, if you want to hear a mob boss make a threat like that, you have to hide a microphone in a deli and park outside in a van with a tape recorder all night long. This genius said it on a podcast. Brendan Carr is the most embarrassing car Republicans have embraced since this.
How long you worked here?
A year.
Okay. Donut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which donut, though?
Just whatever makes sense. No pickles. Hold the pickles.
Oh, well, no, I can get that for you.
One of the reasons Kimmel's material often connects so well with audiences is his ability to point out contradictions that people feel they can already see for themselves. He regularly comes back to situations where public messaging seems completely out of sync with what's happening in plain sight. And that's exactly what he focused on here. He highlighted the contrast between anti-elite rhetoric and an image associated with wealth, privilege, and influence. The humor landed because it touched on a theme that feels familiar to a lot of viewers. People have often watched politicians criticize powerful insiders while at the same time benefiting from lifestyles that are closely tied to status, access, and affluence. Kimmel leaned right into that tension, using it as the foundation for another series of jokes and observations. What made this segment effective wasn't just the punchlines themselves, but the way they were built around a contrast that many people already recognized, allowing the comedy to feel both entertaining and sharply
meddling where they shouldn't under many administrations, but it wasn't always like this. There was an FCC commissioner back in 2022 who worked under Joe Biden who was spot on. He wrote, "President Biden is right. Political satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. It challenges those in power while using humor to draw more people into the discussion. That's why people in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship." You know who wrote that? FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Are here. Our freedom to speak is what they admire most about this country. And that's something I'm embarrassed to say I took for granted until they pulled my friend Steven off the air and tried to coerce the affiliates who run our show in the cities that you live in to take my show off the air. That's not legal. That's not American. That is un-American, and it is so dangerous.
The audience reaction didn't come out of nowhere. People laughed because they already knew the backstory and understood the context behind the jokes. The humor landed because it was connected to events they had been watching play out in real time, making the punchlines feel more relevant and relatable. But the story didn't end there. Instead of stepping away from the debate, J.D. Vance reportedly continued pushing the argument that the controversy was really about ratings and audience decline. At the same time, some conservative commentators tried linking the suspension to Disney's broader business challenges and the pressures facing the streaming industry, suggesting those issues explained the situation entirely. The problem for that argument was that it became harder and harder to maintain as time went on. Kimmel's return continued attracting attention, viewers kept tuning in, and the show remained a topic of conversation. As audience engagement stayed strong, the gap between the narrative being promoted by critics and the response coming from viewers became increasingly difficult to ignore.
Creepy, cringy, awkward, that I give people something called the ick. They want you to think that I can't order a simple donut.
Was appointed chairman of the FCC by this former crusader for free speech.
If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple. Just like dominoes, one by one, they'll go down.
That was also in 2022. And I wonder, how did that guy turn into this guy?
Who would you like to see replace Kimmel on late night?
Well, a lot of people, anybody could replace him. The guy had no talent. Kimmel look, he was fired, he had no talent. He's a whack job, but he had no talent. And more importantly than talent, he had a lot of people have no talent.
What made Kimmel's approach so effective was the way he went about it. He didn't lean on emotional language or make dramatic accusations to get his point across. Instead, he focused on specifics. He talked about station groups, timelines, audience numbers, and distribution details that people could look up and verify for themselves. By putting those facts side by side with the rumors and narratives that were circulating, he gave viewers the space to make up their own minds rather than telling them what to think. That's what made the impact feel so strong. It came across less like a heated argument and more like someone laying out evidence and letting the facts speak for themselves. By the time he delivered that monologue in Brooklyn, it carried the feeling of a closing statement. The jokes were still there, but underneath them was a clear confidence that he didn't need to overstate his case because the facts were already doing most of the heavy lifting.
You assess the legal battles here.
Yeah, I bet all those judges are huge fans of Jimmy Kimmel, by the way, but I think, Vince, that one, we have an appeals process.
There was no shouting, no dramatic outrage, and no need to turn the moment into a spectacle. What Kimmel offered was something much more deliberate and calculated. Instead of trying to overpower the opposing narrative, he framed the situation in a way that quietly chipped away at it. That's become one of his most effective techniques over the years. Rather than arguing louder than everyone else, he lays out the information in a way that makes the contradiction hard to ignore. In this case, while J.D. Vance continued talking about ratings and audience decline, stations across the country were already putting Kimmel's show back on their schedules. The contrast practically spoke for itself. Viewers didn't need lengthy explanations, complicated charts, or endless debate to understand what was happening. They heard the jokes, saw the facts being presented alongside them, and quickly understood the point he was making. The humor worked not just because it was funny, but because it was built around a reality the audience could already see unfolding in front of them.
Look, it's just me, Jimmy, the chairman of the FCC, gently suggesting that you gently shut the up.
But you can't say that. That's a violation of free speech.
Oh, yeah, about that. Speech, it ain't free no more.
What? It's not free no more?
Yeah, we're charging by the word now.
You're charging by the word? How much are you charging?
Depends on what you want to say. Like, you want to say something nice about the president's beautiful thick yellow hair, or how he can do his makeup better than any broad. That's free.
When you look at the entire sequence of events from beginning to end, the story becomes surprisingly straightforward. ABC suspended Kimmel for 6 days, and Donald Trump publicly celebrated the decision. Not long after that, J.D. Vance appeared on Fox and framed the controversy as a ratings problem, arguing that audience decline was the real issue. ABC eventually restored the program, but the story didn't end there. Several station groups, including Sinclair and Nexstar, continued keeping the show off their schedules for a longer period, which only fueled more discussion and speculation. As public attention grew and political pressure surrounding the controversy increased, the situation gradually began to shift. Sinclair eventually reversed its position, Nexstar followed, and FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr later clarified his stance regarding the debate. When viewed in order, the timeline isn't especially confusing or complicated. It's simply a television controversy that played out in public, with each new development adding another chapter to a story that millions of people were watching unfold in real time.
Agree with many of those people on most subjects. Some of the things they say even make me want to throw up. It takes courage for them to speak out against this administration, and they did, and they deserve credit for it. And thanks for telling their followers that our government cannot be allowed to control what we do and do not say on television, and that we have to stand up to it. I've been hearing a lot about what I need to say and do tonight, and the truth is, I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't.
When Kimmel finally stepped onto the stage in Brooklyn, he didn't waste any time getting into the controversy. He referenced J.D. Vance's comments directly, pointed to the stations that had already brought the program back, and then delivered the now famous Vice President Maybelline punchline with a smile. The audience instantly got the joke because they already knew the story behind it. The moment landed not just because it was funny, but because it was tied to events people had been following for weeks. At the same time, the show's ratings saw a noticeable boost after its return and later settled at levels that remained stronger than before. As that happened, the narrative Vance had been promoting became harder and harder to defend. The schedule itself was telling a different story. Stations were putting the show back on the air, viewers were tuning in, and the numbers were painting a picture that spoke much louder than the criticism. By that point, the contrast between what was being claimed and what was actually happening had become increasingly difficult for audiences to ignore.
That guy walked into your office and told you he was there to start making cuts.
I have friends who met a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, who met the best man at their wedding at Turning Points USA because it was an organization of patriots dedicated to making this country the very best country.
So what's the real lesson in all of this? In a lot of ways, it comes down to preparation and credibility. J.D. Vance entered the debate with a claim, while Kimmel responded with what he presented as evidence. That difference helps explain why the segment connected so strongly with viewers. The humor wasn't just built around a punchline. It was built around information that people felt they could follow, examine, and judge for themselves. Kimmel didn't need dramatic twists, over-the-top outrage, or exaggerated storytelling to make his point. Instead, he repeated Vance's remarks, pointed to the growing number of stations that were once again airing the show, and then let the audience draw their own conclusions. That approach gave the segment a different kind of weight. Rather than telling people what to believe, it encouraged them to connect the dots on their own. And that's ultimately what made the monologue so effective. When the facts appear to support your position, sometimes the strongest response isn't to argue louder, it's simply to lay everything out clearly and let the audience decide what the evidence is telling them.
Chairman of the FCC.
You don't need to know my name, and I am the new chairman of the FCC.
You were appointed FCC chairman by Donald Trump?
Sir Trump, yes. I used to do this work for the man here and there in Atlantic City.
But did I just hear you on the phone threatening Whoopi Goldberg?
No, I would never threaten Miss Goldstein. I was just teaching her a lesson about consequences.
No, well, pardon me for saying so. Maybe you're the wrong guy to talk to, but it seems like the FCC is using mob tactics to suppress free speech.
What the did you just say?
My mother.
We are definitely not driving back to the brunt of the effect of the shutdown. It will be felt right here in New York. To punish you for disliking him, Trump is putting $18 billion worth of New York City infrastructure projects, like the new rail tunnels under the Hudson and the Second Avenue subway project, on hold to make sure the money isn't being used to support DEI. Apparently, they think trans stands for transportation over there, and they want to stop it. This is clearly an abuse of power to punish the city. And New York City infrastructure projects are not supposed to be delayed because Trump wants to strong-arm Democrats into cutting health care. They're supposed to be delayed because they're New York City infrastructure projects.
And that brings us to the audience, because moments like this almost always generate strong reactions from the people watching. If the Vice President Maybelline joke was your favorite part of the night, think about which line made you laugh the hardest and why it stood out. And if you were following every station reinstatement as closely as some people follow election results, you probably had a particular affiliate you were keeping an eye on throughout the entire controversy. What made this story so interesting for many viewers was the way public claims were constantly being measured against real-world outcomes. As new developments unfolded, people weren't just listening to arguments, they were watching events play out in real time and comparing the narrative to what was actually happening. That's why stories like this tend to keep people's attention. Whenever a rumor, prediction, or political talking point runs headfirst into measurable results, the conversation becomes even more compelling, and the next chapter is often just as interesting as the one before it.